want Republicans dead.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
So, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
Hey folks, it's Rick, and welcome back to the Enemies List. Today I have one hell of a guest for the show. It is my friend Phil Elwood. He is the author of a tremendous new book called All the Worst Humans, How I Made News for Dictators, Tycoons, and Politicians. Folks, it's a brief read, but it's a hell of a read. Phil has had some amazing adventures in this secret world of public affairs and public influence in Washington that is way beyond what most Americans understand. It's not just press releases and branding. So with that, Phil, I want to welcome you to the show. Congratulations on All the Worst Humans. It is a terrific read, folks. And I say that not because it's just like a deep insight, but because it's a really interesting personal journey as well. So, Phil, tell us how you came to write the book. Give us your story, and let's open the door to the weird, dark world of Washington, D.C., influence and global influence operations that a lot of people just aren't aware of.
Sure. So I think a way to introduce you to this world, like you have to keep in mind, I'm a storyteller. So I talk to reporters all day long and I tell them stories, and sometimes they make their way into news stories. So I'll answer your question about this secret world of public affairs by telling you a quick story about actually defending a terrorist. So in 2009, my client was the family of Muammar Gaddafi, and I was summoned to the Libyan embassy one day by the ambassador, and the Libyan embassy was in the Watergate Hotel, so nothing shady ever happened there. So
ironies abound.
Yeah, so I go into the Watergate and sit down with the ambassador, and he says to me that in 48 hours, the Lockerbie bomber, a man by the name of al-Megrahi, would be released by Scottish authorities. And he wanted to get an idea of what the media's response to this was going to be, particularly the American media. And my response included the phrase shitstorm, because that's what was going to happen. It did happen. The then director of the FBI, Robert Mueller, who makes an appearance later in the book too, Robert Mueller penned a letter calling this a miscarriage of justice. So my job given to me by the Libyans was to get a positive piece of press for the Libyans the week al-Megrahi was released. So what I did was leveraged connections on Capitol Hill to get the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee to sign a letter saying, knock off the Libya bashing. And I leaked that letter to a reporter and got a headline with knock off the Libya bashing. As I put it in the book, I deserve whatever the opposite of a Pulitzer is for that one. So that's just a way to tell you about this.
Well, so you came into DC like a lot of us, interested in government, interested in policy, interested in Congress. You like a lot of us, found yourself in that weird world of that sense that you get when you're working in Washington as a young person, of like being in something important, being in something that is consequential, being in something that's vital. So tell us about your journey from sort of debater to staffer, and then how did you get your start inside the actual industry of DC PR and influence work?
Well, that's a great question, and it illustrates how you can tell the same story two very different ways. So let me give you the LinkedIn answer, and then I'll give you the real answer. The LinkedIn answer is that before the age of 24, I graduated my undergraduate degree from Georgetown, my graduate degree from the London School of Economics, and I worked for both Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan and Senator Carl Levin, two lions of the Senate. The non-LinkedIn answer to that question is that at the age of 20, I dropped out of a university in Pennsylvania due to a cocaine problem, moved to DC to dry out, ended up working for Moynihan, got admitted to George Washington University as a transfer student, was promptly thrown out before I had the opportunity to enroll for drunkenly crashing through their window one afternoon. And then I went to work for a different senator after I was thrown out of GW. And I worked for him for about a year. They said that, you really need to get a college degree. They helped me get into Georgetown and then later the London School of Economics. So that is the non-LinkedIn answer to show you how you can have two very different versions of the same story.
So as you thrived in that staff environment for a while, you enjoyed it. You wanted to, put your skills to work. And so you went out to work for a PR company that is almost cinematic in the way you describe the thing. There's a lot of Bond villain vibe in the whole thing. Talk to us about how that led you into, and one of the greatest, most riveting, and folks, when I say it's an amazing story, I use that in the traditional sense of the word amazing. I was reading it and thinking, good God, how's he going to get out of this? Tell us how going to this rather posh PR world led you to a weekend in Vegas that involved briefcases full of cash, Libyans, guns, and drugs.
Yeah, it's a little different. It's a little different. So my job has given me the opportunity to do a lot of very exotic travel, sometimes in private planes even. And it's very exciting.
We love us some PJs.
Oh yeah, it's very exciting. And one of those assignments. Now, the Vegas story. A few things you should know about that. The first one is I had never been to Las Vegas before this particular weekend, so it was all new to me. The second thing is they didn't tell me what I was going to Vegas for until I was on the airplane and they had closed the passenger door. I then received an email that was a 3-page, if you printed it out, it would have been 3 pages long. And it was this list of demands from a guy named Muqtasim Gaddafi, the third or fourth son of Muammar. He was thought at the time to be the heir apparent. He was the national security advisor of the country. He was 35, had his own military unit, and was one of the scariest, most brutal people I have ever met in my entire life. So my job was to make sure that the media did not report on any of our activities in Vegas over the course of this wild weekend. Right. I want to give your listeners an idea of just the mentality of this person. I mean, he had access to Libya's $60 billion sovereign wealth fund. He could walk into the Bellagio and buy the place if he felt like it. Sure. So you just have to get into the head of this person. And also his brother recently, but just before we got to Vegas, caused a diplomatic fight between Switzerland and Libya for beating up a hotel employee, getting arrested. The brother leader, Muammar Gaddafi, suspended diplomatic relations with Switzerland, arrested Swiss diplomats in Libya, and divested billions of dollars from Switzerland over this incident. So I was very worried about anything happening in the United States with Muqtasim Gaddafi. I mean, this could be.
Yeah, I could see why.
Yeah, so the stakes were rather high. And I was babysitting him the weekend before his father gave his first and only address to the United Nations General Assembly, which has led to its own.
Did not go well.
No, did not. It led to its own crazy story of, pitching a tent somewhere and renting some land from Donald Trump to do that.
From Donald Trump at his at Seven Springs, right?
Yeah, I believe that is right. Yes. There was even a sacrificial goat there. I don't know. I'm not sure about all the details.
As one does.
As one does. It was one of the crazier stories. It is definitely a highlight of the book.
But it was also at this point you were exposed to these very high risk, high intensity conflicts with these people, and these very the argument of everybody deserves representation carries you for a long way. But there's also a point where you're starting to confront, your own demons and all of the stress and the tension and the moral questions around guys like the doctor. I reading that thing where they tell you to go up and get cash out of the briefcases that are in the room, and there's hundreds of thousands of dollars and guns. But you can read your stress building and building and building and building in the book, and it takes a real toll on you.
Yes. Yeah. It you can't. I mean, you've got to pay the piper at some point. And that is one of the kind of unresolved questions of the book is just, what is the penance for something like this? It's just
Right.
It's
Right.
something that I leave up to the reader.
I want to get to that question as we go here. So you're with this firm. You eventually move to another organization and work with Richard Levick, who was a good friend. Was considered one of the great sort of characters in public relations, public affairs in DC. You went to work for Richard, and you found yourself with even crazier people. Your story about Kim.com, who I've had a very tangential thing with, this weird, gigantic German hacker living in New Zealand, involved in the fringes of the internet shadiness. You go to work for them, and in a weird way, it felt like when you went to Levick, you were in some ways in a more, you saw the crazy people, but you also were working in a more procedural crisis communications, more substantive things. So I want you to tell us a little bit about, because most people will never be in the situation where they need crisis communications help. Tell us what the rules are for people. How do they what are the rules that you have a client who comes to you, a Kim.com or the Libyans or whoever it is, whether it's a normal company or some crazed third world dictator. What are the rules of PR that work? How do you put your storytelling ability to work to make things turn out well for your clients?
Well, the number one rule that I learned from Richard Levick was that you cannot talk your way out of something you acted your way into. Okay, now, So what does that mean? You can't just put out a press release if you harmed thousands of people, or you can't just cover it up with words. So you have to act your way out of problems. And so it's a little bit like saying, well, you should hire a crisis communications firm, but we can't just talk your way out of something you've acted your way into. You have to make a change. You have to do something newsworthy in order to give us the ammunition to get working. Kim.com, I'm glad you brought him up. He was, he's the perfect character for is he an internet freedom fighter? Is he a bad person? But he sadly was
the worst
arrested.
Copyright violator in the world, all that.
Or was he showing us a new way to distribute entertainment over the internet?
Sure.
I don't know the answer to that, because before we got to the solution to it, the FBI talked to the New Zealand counterterrorism authorities. This was a little extreme. The raid on Kim.com's house with the attack helicopters and the assault weapons was a little over the top. Yeah. And the indictment that our experts said was written by the PR team at the Department of Justice, not by the lawyers. I mean, they described it as a mega conspiracy, whatever that means. But what that did was we had to stop working for Kim after a little while, and but it always kind of stayed in my head. And then there was this opportunity to kind of strike back that came from a trade dispute between the United States and Antigua, and I ran the trade dispute on behalf of Antigua.
Right. I mean,
it had to do with intellectual property and as a file share as well.
Do you think that people understand just how deeply wired all the professional competitive communications stuff like this, how deeply wired that all is into the broader like way Washington works. Do you think people understand that at all? Do they get that?
I don't, and that really gets to one of the main reasons that I wanted to write this book, and it certainly wasn't to increase cynicism or skepticism about the media. Rather, it was to increase media literacy. I don't want people to just disbelieve everything they see in the media, but I want them to read it with an eye on, why is this being told to me? Who is telling it to me? And why are they telling it to me right now? You know, and it's those kinds of questions that not only reporters, but also media consumers should be asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some folks may have this sense of like, they go one way or the other. It's like, I saw it on the internet, it's real, or I saw it on the internet, nothing's real.
Right.
There seems to be like a sort of like we've lost a kind of vital center of how we think about information in this country.
Yeah, with the proliferation in media, you think we'd get smarter, but all it's done is forced us to think in more binary ways. People are either good or bad. Well, one of the points of this book is that characters are complicated. You know, we like to say that every story has three parts: a villain, a victim, and a vindicator. And at various stages in this book, I play each one of those roles. I very much am the villain for part of this. And you have to come to grips with the fact that your narrator is somebody that you kind of detest for part of this book.
Well, so as I talked about earlier, you had a lot of stress in your life, and you were and a lot of depression. You were sort of treating it with alcohol, and you weren't your best self in a lot of this. And you had a few moments that there before the grace of God moments, as I call them. Eventually, you ran afoul of the Department of Justice, and eventually you had the FBI basically knocking on your door. Tell us a little bit about that story and how that came to pass.
Sure. So, I mean, if the FBI comes to your house, that is going to rank amongst the worst days in your life by far.
100%.
If you are not sure why they're there, it's even scarier. If you get a call at 6:30 in the morning and they say, this is the FBI, and they inform you that they just knocked on your neighbor's door accidentally and because they didn't have your correct apartment, that adds a lot of stress as well. Yes, this was a real kind of come to Jesus moment for me, and it really forced me to reevaluate my life and kind of the choices I was making. As I put it in the book, I created a deadline for myself. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but the origin of the word deadline comes from the American Civil War. They didn't have the money to build walls around the prison, so instead they drew a line around the prison and put snipers at all four corners. And if you crossed the line, the deadline, they shot you. I don't know how the phrase migrated into newsrooms exactly, but it gave me a way to look at my life and kind of set some deadlines for what I would and wouldn't do. And it forced me to say, to really start asking the question, should I do these things rather than just can I do these things?
Well, that leads to, in your work, you went to work for a company called the Psy Group, and a lot of people in politics have sort of heard about it. Talk to us a little bit about how that was, in a lot of ways, the big intern to where you are to writing this book. Tell us about your adventures with the Psy Group, because I think Americans who do know about it, their antennas go whoop, and those who don't should.
Right. Well, okay. So it all started because I was bored at my job. I worked for a polling firm, and it was a non-crisis job. And then I got contacted by a headhunter, and this headhunter said, will you come and work for these Israeli intelligence officers who have privatized their craft?
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't resist. I mean, if you were ever approached by somebody who self-describes as a foreign intelligence officer, run in the other direction. But I ran towards that.
Run like hell. Nothing
Run
good
like
comes
hell.
of it.
Yeah, shortly thereafter, I was on a plane to Tel Aviv. I was meeting with these characters who had a lot of very strange requests. So, it was create a dummy email address and print off this document and take it to this address in DC, or, we're going to move a bunch of money through your bank accounts, and I hope you're okay with that. And it all got rather strange, but I did it for about 2.5 years because they were pretty much my only client. I was the first time I went and worked for myself. And it got stranger and stranger, and then suddenly the FBI showed up, and I had to terminate my relationship with them and end up as a witness in the Mueller investigation. So Robert Mueller makes another appearance.
He keeps popping up like a bad penny. But you ended up doing a lot of the things when you were working with them. You sort of saw an even deeper layer, I think, because look, a lot of what your work was with Levick and then before that was explicable to many people. You get on the phone with reporters, you tell your story, you talk about your client's good side, you talk about what they're doing to fix their problem.
Yeah.
The side group was a lot deeper in terms of manipulating social media, in terms of manipulating the press, in terms of trying to bring very direct pressure on individuals that their clients wanted to either influence or demean or what have you. Mm-hmm. That really, and knowing some of the people around that orbit. When I saw that in your book, I was like, immediately, like I sat back in my chair, like, okay, now we're in the shit. So a lot of the things they were doing ended up having an influence on not only the 2016 election, but then going forward from there. Tell us a little bit more about what they were up to and what Mueller's folks were interested in learning about.
Sure. Well, one of the things, so they, Mueller's folks were interested in a meeting between with the Trump organization. This happened prior to my working with the Psy group. I didn't know anything about it. They certainly didn't advertise it to me. But this was found out through a different witness. There was a presentation on his phone, something called Project Rome. Which was this mysterious project that the Psy group worked on. And so it caused us to get caught into the kind of the net of the Mueller investigation. And I to this day do not know the extent of what they did or didn't do. They didn't They didn't share a lot with their PR guy. I hate to break it to you.
Well, people who don't. There's a cluster of Israeli based and Israeli intelligence folks, NSO, Black Cube, Psy, on all these services that I think when you drop them into the ecosystem of Washington, it gives people in politics this sort of like it's a jolt, like they're on a drug, because they get so excited about the ability to do something that feels almost illegal, how powerful it is and how manipulative it is.
Well, right. And you'd be shocked the number of corporations, lobbying firms, public relations firms who met with the Psy group who were very interested. And, I was shocked. We were really only tossed out of one meeting that I can remember where the people on the other end of the table were just so disdainful about, what we were doing and how wrong it was. But everybody else was pretty receptive to the and interested in the capabilities of the Psy group.
So they sort of have gone by the wayside now, but obviously these a lot of these things, they fall apart, they come back together, they rebrand, they change. Some of the players will disappear and reappear, etc. Is there some firm in DC right now that you see as the nexus of a lot of the things that we're talking about here, of this sort of dark PR, the sort of inside game stuff that most Americans wouldn't be aware of?
Well, I don't want to call anybody out specifically by name. I do that quite a bit in the book.
You
but
do?
I will say that there's a story that I'm following pretty closely about a public affairs firm in DC hiring hackers to go after their opponents. And there's a great reporter named Raphael Satter who's doing some great work on this issue.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And
I know the name. I know the name.
The influence business is great. I don't. When you get into things like hacking and illegal activities, that's
right.
That's when that question about, can we do things or should we do things really needs to get more into the DC kind of mindset.
Sure.
Just because you can hack your opponent, it doesn't make it a good idea.
Doesn't mean you oughta.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
So, excuse me. So, Phil, you decide to write the book. You've sort of changed the vector of your life, the sort of direction of your life right now. How are you doing otherwise? I mean, are you happy you put this out there? Does it feel like you're sort of wrapping up some of that part of your life?
Well, I used to value my anonymity a great deal. We talk about in the book how I hid behind a dead jazz reviewer by the same name. This is a very different experience for me. Talking to you, this is one of the first times I've ever spoken on the record in my life. A lot of my friends are journalists, and even the ones I've known for 15 and 20 years, the first words out of my mouth when we get on the phone are, "This is off the record." It has to be.
Until about 10 years ago, I was pretty much the same way. Like this is off the record, right? This is off the record. We're off the record. Yeah. I mean, yes. I know exactly where that moment is that you were, because there is a value to people who know things for reporters. They need people who understand things that are happening inside the system. They need people who can talk to them cogently and with clarity about what's happening. But it is a weird thing when you suddenly, where your anonymity suddenly goes and you're in the spotlight.
The trick about this business is you have to be willing to kind of put your body between a piece of information and the media. And that is a very dangerous place to be. So that's why so many of us seek anonymity.
Well, I am delighted with the fact that you have sort of, I think it feels to me, at least, let me just say this as your friend, it feels to me like you have written this book in a way that helps you close out part of your life and sets you on a direction for the next half of it. And I think it's really inspirational in a lot of ways. And I know that probably wasn't what you set out to write, but I was like, by the end of it, I was cheering for you. You had become the vindicator in your story. And I really, folks, again, the book is All the Worst Humans by Phil Elwood. You can get it, what is it, tomorrow, right? It's out June 1st?
June 25th.
You can, 25th. Okay. Coming June 25th, where all fine books are sold. Phil, thank you so much, my friend, for coming on the show today. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the book, and look forward to talking to you again soon, and wish you great success on the book and the book tour.
Thank you so much. Talk to you soon, Rick.
All right. I want you to ask yourselves just what would happen if in Dearborn, Michigan, which is a majority Muslim population. What would happen if the following idea was posted in the news there? It said, Dearborn's City Council, backed by the local mullahs, this week passed a law requiring the posting of the Quran's hadiths in every public school classroom. Let me tell you what would happen. People would lose their shit. They'd go out of their damn minds. Fox News would be 24/7 live coverage. People would be calling for Dearborn to be nuked from space. All of it is a lie. Because what did happen this week in Louisiana was that the governor signed a bill that was passed by the GOP legislature there, Governor Jeff Landry, the supreme mullah of Louisiana, to mandate the posting of the 10 Commandments in every classroom. They didn't just mandate the posting of the Commandments, they mandated the size of the poster and the font. This is grotesquely unconstitutional in every way, shape, and form. This is grotesquely unconstitutional in the most egregious possible fashion. And yet they did it. Why they do it? Because we're in a cold civil war and a hot culture war, and they want to push this to the Supreme Court. They're hoping that the Red Court will take it. They're hoping that we will overturn 240 years of constitutional intent of the founders that we not have a state religion. And if you are a constitutional originalist and you believe in the founders and the words of the Constitution, you will look at the First Amendment to the Constitution, the first paragraph, which forbids the establishment of state religious institutions. That's what they're trying to do in Louisiana. It's wrong. Jeff Landry and the Louisiana legislature, you are firmly on the enemies list.